They said she was cursed long before they threw her into the mine pit. It started as whispers, the kind that crept through church pews and lingered behind shuttered windows. A cow miscarried, a child caught fever, a storm ruined the wheat. Somehow, her name followed every misfortune like a shadow. She had arrived in town years ago with nothing but a single trunk and eyes too steady for a woman alone. She spoke politely, worked harder than most, and never begged, but that only made people uneasy. Folks preferred grief loud and desperate. Her quiet strength felt like defiance. The mine pit sat at the edge of town, an old scar from the days when men believed the earth owed them riches. It had been closed after 2 brothers died in a collapse, sealed with boards that rotted over time, left to gape open like a warning no one heeded. Children dared each other to toss stones inside and listen for the echo. Adults avoided it, except today. Today, it had a purpose. They dragged her there just after noon, when the sun was high enough to make judgment feel righteous. Her wrists were bound, rope biting into skin already raw from days of rough handling. She didn't scream. That unsettled them more than any curse ever could. She only asked once, quietly, "What have I done?" No one answered. Accusations don't need replies when fear is doing the talking. The silent rancher stood apart from the crowd, leaning against the fence rail as if this were no different from an auction or a sermon. He had seen mobs before. He knew how quickly people stopped being neighbors when they were certain they were right. He had known her too, known the way she bought extra flour and left loaves by doorsteps at night, known how she mended clothes for widows who pretended not to notice. He had watched her take insults like weather, head down, back straight. He had never defended her. Silence was safer. Silence kept his land unburned, his cattle unpoisoned, his life undisturbed. When they reached the pit, someone hesitated. The drop was farther than expected, the darkness swallowing light just inches below the rim. A man tied a rope around her waist with shaking hands, muttering prayers that sounded more like excuses. "If she's innocent," someone said, "the earth will spare her." The words drew nods. Faith, twisted just enough to feel clean. She looked around then, not begging, just searching. Her eyes passed over faces she recognized, faces she had fed, healed, forgiven. They slid past the rancher last. For a moment, something flickered between them, recognition, maybe. He didn't move. His jaw clenched, and shame settled heavy in his chest. The rope lowered her halfway before someone claimed it was unnecessary. Another voice shouted that curses didn't deserve mercy. Hands let go. The rope burned, snapped, and her body vanished with a scream that cut short as stone-swallowed sound. Dust billowed up, choking, final. Someone crossed themselves. Someone else laughed nervously. Judgment, it seemed, was complete. People began to turn away. That was when the rancher pushed off the fence. Boots hit dirt hard. He strode to the edge, ignoring shouts, ignoring the sudden hush that followed him like a held breath. He peered down into the pit. Darkness stared back, thick and absolute. Somewhere far below, a faint sound echoed, maybe a groan, maybe imagination. His heart hammered so loud he wondered how no one else heard it. He thought of all the moments he had chosen quiet. Every time he'd lowered his eyes. Every time he'd told himself it wasn't his place. The weight of those choices pressed heavier than the fear curling in his gut now. Without a word, he shrugged off his coat, reached for a lantern, and tested its flame. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "You'll die," someone shouted. Another grabbed his arm. He shook them off easily, movements deliberate, almost calm. He looped a rope around his waist, tied it to a post with a rancher's knot no storm had ever undone, and swung one leg over the edge. For the first time in years, his voice broke the silence. Low, certain, move. No one did. He stepped into the pit, letting the darkness swallow him too, and the town stood frozen, watching a man descend into the very truth they had tried so hard to bury. The darkness took him whole within seconds. The air in the mine pit was colder than the surface, thick with damp that clung to his lungs and turned every breath heavy. The lantern's flame wavered as he descended, its small circle of light scraping across jagged rock walls scored by old pick marks. Each scrape whispered of men who had once believed this hole would make them rich. It had only made ghosts. The rope creaked above him, fibers groaning under his weight. He controlled the descent with practiced movements, boots braced against the stone, palms burning as the rope slid inch by inch. He did not rush. Panic wasted strength, and strength was all that mattered now. Below him, somewhere beyond the reach of light, came a faint sound, air forced through teeth, a broken rhythm of breath. It was real. She was alive, Hold on, he called down, his voice rough, echoing back warped and unfamiliar. The words felt clumsy in his mouth. He wasn't used to offering comfort out loud. The mind swallowed his voice, but the sound below shifted, a soft moan answering him. Relief hit so hard his knees nearly buckled against the wall. When the lantern finally revealed the floor, he dropped the last few feet, landing hard on one knee. Pain flared, sharp and bright, but he barely noticed. She lay several feet away, half curled against the wall where the shaft widened into a shallow chamber. Blood darkened her hair at the temple. One leg was bent wrong, the ankle already swelling beneath torn fabric. Her chest rose and fell, shallow but steady. He crossed the distance quickly and knelt beside her. Up close, she looked smaller, younger, stripped of the rumors that had hardened her in people's minds. Dirt streaked her face. Her lashes fluttered as the lantern light touched her eyes. "You came," she whispered, disbelief threading through the words. Not accusation, not gratitude, simple astonishment. He swallowed. "Had to," he said, the truth bare and unpolished. She tried to move and cried out, pain slicing through her composure. He stilled her with a gentle hand, surprising both of them. His touch was firm but careful, the way he handled injured calves in spring. He checked her head first, then her ankle, working methodically, mind narrowing to the task. Fear could wait. Above them, stone groaned. Pebbles skittered down the walls, clattering around their feet. The mine was not stable, it had never been. Time pressed in on them, heavy and insistent. He tore a strip from his shirt and wrapped her ankle, binding it tight enough to support but not cut off blood. His hands were steady despite the cold. "Can you hold on?" he asked. She nodded, teeth clenched. "Don't leave me." "I won't." The words came without thought, a vow made in the dark. He stood and scanned the shaft, measuring distance, calculating weight. The rope hung above them, swaying slightly. Getting her up would be harder than getting down. He tied a loop under her arms, padding it with his coat so the rope wouldn't bite too deep. She watched him with a strange calm, as if the worst had already happened and survival was now just another task. "Why?" she asked quietly as he secured the knot. He paused, fingers tightening. Why was a question with too many answers. Guilt, anger, a line crossed that he could not uncross. He met her eyes. "Because they were wrong," he said. "And I was quieter than I should have been." The lantern flickered. A chunk of rock fell nearby, shattering against the ground. She flinched. He took a breath and began the climb. He braced his boots against the wall and pulled, muscles screaming as the rope took her weight. Inch by inch, he lifted her, tying off progress whenever he could, hauling again, refusing to look down at the growing drop beneath him. Sweat mixed with dust, stinging his eyes. His hands burned raw, skin splitting where the rope rubbed. Above, voices shouted, panic now, uncertain. They pulled too, not out of kindness but fear of what would happen if the mine claimed them both. Halfway up, the lantern slipped from its hook and shattered below, plunging them into near total darkness. For a moment, terror surged, wild and suffocating. He shut it down. Darkness was just another thing to work through. "Stay with me," he said, more to himself than her. "I am," she answered, her voice thin but present. "I'm not letting go." Neither was he. Even as the mine groaned around them, even as his strength thinned and the rope cut deeper, he kept pulling, dragging both of them upward, refusing to let the earth finish what the town had started. They broke the surface in a rush of light and noise. Hands grabbed at them, hauling, stumbling backward as if the pit itself might lunge after them. The rancher collapsed to his knees, chest heaving, blood slicking his palms where the rope had peeled his skin raw. For a heartbeat, the town didn't speak. They stared at the woman breathing on the ground, at the man who had gone down and come back marked by stone and silence. Someone tried to help her sit up. The rancher's arm shot out, stopping them. "Easy," he said, voice hoarse. It was only the second time anyone there had heard him speak that day, and it carried more authority than shouting ever could. He shrugged off his coat and draped it over her shoulders, blocking curious eyes. She looked at him, tears cutting clean lines through the dirt on her face. "You didn't have to," she murmured. "I know," he answered. And that was the truest thing he'd said in years. The crowd shifted, unease rippling through it like wind through dry grass. No one wanted to meet his gaze. They had expected a body, a conclusion that would let them sleep at night. Instead, they were left with a living woman and the weight of what they had almost done. A few muttered that the fall hadn't killed her because curses protected their own. The words sounded thin now, brittle. Lies did not fare well in daylight. The rancher stood, ignoring the pain lancing through his leg. He placed himself between her and the crowd, broad shoulders a wall. For years, he had mastered the art of not being seen. Now he made himself impossible to ignore. He lifted his chin and looked at them, really looked, at neighbors he'd known all his life. "She's innocent," he said. The words were plain, unadorned. No sermon, no threat, just fact. A murmur rose, then fell. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else spat into the dirt. No one contradicted him, not because they suddenly believed in justice, but because something in his voice suggested that pushing further would cost them more than they were willing to pay. A doctor was fetched at last, summoned with the urgency that should have come sooner. He examined her ankle, her head, shaking his own in quiet disbelief. "She's lucky," he said. The rancher's mouth tightened. Luck had nothing to do with it. They carried her to his wagon. No one questioned it, no one offered their own home. Silence returned, but it was different now, thick, watchful, ashamed. At the ranch, he settled her on the narrow bed by the window, washed the blood from her hair with hands that still trembled. She watched him, eyes tracking every movement. "They'll come back," she said softly. "They always do. Let them," he replied. He stoked the fire, set water to boil. The ranch had faced drought, fire, and debt. It could face a town's anger too. Days passed. Word spread, changing shape as it traveled. Some said he'd gone mad. Some said the pit had revealed something holy. Children stopped throwing stones when they passed his land. Women left baskets of food at the gate and didn't knock. Men looked away when he rode into town for supplies. Her ankle healed slowly. She learned the rhythms of the ranch, the quiet labor that filled days and softened nights. He spoke little, but when he did, it mattered. She told him her real story, where she'd come from, what she'd lost, how easily grief could be mistaken for guilt. He listened the way he always had, fully. One evening, as the sun bled red across the fields, she stood on the porch with him, leaning on a cane. "You went down after me," she said. "Even when everyone else had decided I was already dead." He nodded. "I figured," he said, eyes on the horizon, "someone had to." The town never apologized. Towns rarely do. But they stopped calling her cursed. They stopped pretending the pit didn't exist. And when the boards finally went up, sealed tight at last, people remembered the day a silent rancher chose to speak with his actions, and how the truth, once pulled into the light, refused to be thrown away again.